Looks like both of the A players for these teams playing up against each other, as is the way of things. And we see Dimit versus Bertram again. Interesting that with all of the team matches, with all three different decks available in each of these rounds, that we are seeing the same kind of champions over and over. But this is likely Diamond something versus Sapphire, just mono Sapphire, and it's likely that this is even the Diamond Ruby deck again. Oh, but Jin has laid down a Mimeobot first, which very drastically changes what I would expect his deck to be.
We did mention that the robot aggro is the kind of deck that could just exist and not take cards from the other player's card pools. Henip's card blocker not stopping us from seeing what he's drawing. He is indeed Ruby.
That Mimeobot's actually so he can copy the Reese in his hand. And he is playing Mono Sapphire. He just wants multiple Reeses at the same time.
That's super secret tech. Can't argue.
I mean, it wouldn't be terrible to have multiple Reeses out on the board, like to bypass the unique tag in that way. So we see a single diamond and a pass. Naturally, that was a dual shard, so there's no resource for the turn available. And we'll see if the, relatively speaking, low curve of what a lot of people call the Kaldheim deck, because he's the first person to top 8 with it in a competitive, in a large-scale competitive tournament, will be able to throw down.
grabs a artifact.
Yeah, grabs an Electroid, apparently.
Pretty strong start. We do know...
It was not Electroid. It must be something else. The Electroid is only one cost. It has not been modified.
He played Gearsmith for 1, War Machinist for 1, and then played the Electroid for free. It's just not updated.
Oh, fair enough.
The Gearsmith manages to... Yes, it just swapped over to 0. It bugs all the time. Wow.
That is a crazy top deck.
Pretty good card to have found. Like we said, Henip's card plucker not blocking it. And that, I mean, we'll try to avoid discussing those cards, but that one we knew was going to be snap played. Heatwave clearing up half of Jin's hand immediately and leaving that Electroid, regardless of it being a 3/4 for 0, on the board with nothing. It cannot interact here. Djinn refilling the board slightly by tunneling a troop and playing a charge bot, leaving open his charge power here, interestingly. Perhaps wanting to avoid a second Heatwave.
This deck is very popular in Arena, and I used it myself in the last VIP tournament. It is very susceptible to having your board wiped early. As an aggro deck, it tends to leave you dry if it's answered. You don't have much to recover. Living Totem coming out from Henip. It's also something that the robot deck doesn't want to deal with. It can fly, can get flight, swift strike, life drain, all sorts of things, pump.
If that troop underground is what we think it is, being the Mega Hulk, it's very strange that he didn't use his charge power. So it could be a Reese tunneled first there.
Could be a Reese tunneled first. Could be that it was just trying to avoid the heat wave. Like really that it's like a second heat wave was what he was like really just playing around. Like maybe that one extra tunneling counter just wasn't what he was worried about.
Yeah, maybe. But, I mean, if it was Reese, it would make sense that he held back the charge power, and then maybe top-decked into Mega Hulk and thought, okay, now it's worth using that charge power.
Absolutely.
But obviously with the totem there, to go to your point, he knows with the totem there he's not going to get heat-waved because, you know, either he kills his own living totem or he buffs the totem, in which case there's no heat-wave this turn.
Yeah. Of note, to some little extent, still 6 cards in Henip's hand, whereas the dwarf deck has kind of just blown its cards onto the field, just like in one giant burst. There's a crackling bolt on the charge bot just to clear up a couple of things, I guess.
If Henip assumes that there's a Mega Hulk as either of those two troops, removing a robot also both slows that down, but also gets Electroid farther away from being able to act, as Jinja only has one card in hand.
I will
And if
say
that were a
this.
robot,
I would have vastly enjoyed myself if one of those was a Fisher Smith.
That would have been very brutal. Typically speaking, that list of call times doesn't have Fisher Smith's main deck, but a large portion of that, I believe, is for the first couple of tournaments, Fisher Smith wasn't actually an available option.
right? I think
And
Go
perhaps
ahead.
now the deck has evolved to that point where Fisher Smith exists. It must at least exist in the reserves, I would assume.
I mean,
But-
it's low cost. It is very good against certain things, so I don't see why you wouldn't at least have it in the reserves. Angel of Dawn off the top. The
just continuing the
stuff
streak of
just
very
gets
good
worse.
pulls.
Yeah, the top decks have been not necessarily like just like, oh my god, you're top decking me, but the top decks have been fairly good. Every card just something else that Henip would really want here. Although of note, still stuck on 3, and with only a single Ruby threshold available, so that might actually be the case where Henip wants to draw shards here. So we see just a little bit more board developing. I haven't been paying attention, but I think if all 3 of those robots stay on the field, and if that first tunneled troop was a Mega Hulk, that would be 2/3/3. So next turn it
2/3.
should surface. Was it 2/2/3 or 2/3/3?
The worker bot came out, but it wasn't there at the start of the turn, and then the bolt came down. So two upkeep standbys have gone past with 2 robots on board, and the
Okay.
next one will be 3. I believe that's correct.
Which means that we'll go to 4 counters next turn and not surface. Kind of an awkward thing with Mega Hulk anyways. If it goes to its 4th counter and then reduces its tunneling cost to below 4, it doesn't actually surface that turn. But if it has 0 tunneling, you can tunnel it and it immediately surfaces with speed that turn, which is also...
Right.
So it's a little bit of a conflict. Honestly, I would consider it a bug. But it's a bug that's fairly well known in that it does that thing specifically. And the
Neo is
first...
correct.
Yep, the first tunneling troop is actually Reese, which makes the second one possibly a Mimeo-botted Reese. And
That
not a Mega Hulk
Could
at
be
all.
true. That could be true.
And
A jank bot coming out from the worker bot charge power.
now, this is great, but the 1 in 34 or so chance, the 2 in 34 chance of creating a flyer here was much better for Henip.
Well, the problem is, he's got 3 resources. Oh, Terra.
Or he
Oh,
could just
okay.
have
I
a
take it
Terra
back.
button
I
hand.
take it back. But yeah, the 3 resources are open, so he could have given it flight and +1/+1 next turn for lethal. But 2 Terrabots will certainly help things along here.
Yeah, at this point, not even like a heat wave. It has to be like... has to be a lot to really deal with this board.
So we've gone from Jin in deep trouble to there's a board.
Another
Oh.
Angel of Dawn off the top, which is not really what he wants.
It's not what he wants, yeah. And he can only pump that living totem once a turn. If he was able to pump that living totem twice a turn, he could stabilize this game. But as it stands, that Jankbot is going to be too much. It's very likely a Mega Hulk Underground. I don't know if Henip will be able to, even with 6 cards in hand, with only 3 resources, can he save this board? Next turn,
Henip was clearly staggered there as well. He forgot to use his resources at the end of his turn onto his living totem. So he was clearly taken back by what just happened to him in that last turn.
Yeah, I didn't even
forget
realize
that
that
living
the
totem.
resources are open. And there's that Mega Hulk. Bear in mind, of all of these troops, there's a couple copies extra in Jin's deck to draw into here.
So Jin's Jankbot does retrieve two shards and a Construction Plans Warhulk. Repel on the Mega Hulk.
Yeah, the repel is good here. Of some mild note and kind of hilarity to me, a second Reese out of the deck is actually really bad for Jin. Well, not terrible for Jin, but it would not be what he wants here.
Depends what the Mimeo target was, I suppose.
Well, yeah, I mean, if it's more Mimioed Reese's, it could be good.
But yes, because the new one will replace the old one. The old one has the modified power because it was tunneled, and the new one will not have it. So simply worker bots.
Ornibot's good as well. Gives him another blocking option.
And he can activate both his Warhulk and his Hornibot this turn.
Ooh, that top deck from Henip. Reese does create a Charge Hulk, which gives the Jin 2 more charges. But Solitary Exile coming out from Henip. And as expected, hovering over that Reese.
I'm not sure it's enough at this point.
I think getting rid of the Terrabot, like missing the flight on that totem here, is actually kind of costly because he could have gone for the Terrabot this turn, had 3 flyers, and more or less killed his opponent.
Yeah, no. If it had flight, yeah. Well, he would still need an extra point of damage.
And with the remaining robots that are ready, both construction plans can be completed this turn.
It's a lot of damage swinging in next turn. It might even potentially... No, it's not lethal without that Tectonic Mega Hulk around. But it's a lot. And it will be another swing with the Jankbot, which is especially notable here.
Gotta say, I'm always excited to see a Jankbot drawing from a smaller deck.
Yeah, it's a little more interesting than the full-on, the Jankbot from 150 cards.
Does he go for the conservative swing, or does he push damage?
I think he goes with Jankbot, probably the Warhulk, and leaves everything else behind.
Now, he did not attack with the Reactor Bot last turn. But the Reactor Bot, if he gets shards like this, that's 2 charges, so it becomes 5/5 and harder to block. But in this case, he does get a Mega Hulk, and it looks like it looks like a GG from Henip in response to that.
Kuzumo is asking for his opponent to check battle chat because Kuzumo is trying to find out if you want to play or draw in Game 2. When you guys go into Game 2, please make sure you open battle chat so you and your opponent can have a small civil discussion about who plays and who draws first. Thank you.
So that game, an early early top decked Heat Wave to clear out the robot player's board didn't matter as much as the Reese was the turn 1 tunnel, and that combined with some fortuitous worker bot transforms turned around the game.
Those were very good Reese draws. Again, there's about 34, 35 things that Reese can transform a robot into, depending on the availability of certain cards in whatever patch you're playing. And about 7 of those are much above the others. So it's a fairly good chance of getting something really, really good. But the top 3 would have to be Jankbot, Slaughter Gear, and to some extent, like Terrabot, Tectonic Mega Hulk are both very good. It's kind of a tie between all of those things.
We saw earlier Reese getting transforming such gems as another worker bot. Inductocopter is okay, but is a bit small.
Yeah, the Tower Hulk, which it shouldn't be able to create, I think maybe could be. I don't know. It's still creating them, so.
And it lived.
Yeah, that's the first time we've seen a lot of Reese's create that Tower Hawk while we've been casting matches over the last 5 tournaments. But man, that's the first time we've got to see one stay on the board because normally it comes into play 0-0.
So notably, in the aggro style robot deck, that we call it we a lot of us call it the Kaldheim deck because it's the player that popularized it. He specifically, in talking about playing that deck, said that he did not like Reese in the deck, and here we saw the deck. Obviously, it is including Reese. Reese, very good tunneled card. Bomb in that case was the card that saved him the game.
Uh, yeah, Kuzumo, your opponent is speaking in chat. It is Guer in Twitch chat. He would like to play. He cannot chat in game for some reason. So here we see game 2 firing up between Jin and Henip here. Looks like Henip is going first, naturally. Using that Shard of Fate in the dual shard deck to find a diamond, which is appropriate here. Obviously, as the diamond player with angels in your deck, you want that diamond threshold online as soon as possible to prevent the turn 2 Angel of Shame. We'll see this time Jin leading off with a Ruby instead of a Sapphire. Just putting down Electroid, which is one of the least offensive plays that the deck can really do on turn 1, although it can explode into the most offensive turn 2. We see Henip follow up with a Ruby and just windmill slam a Soul Marble down onto the board.
Well,
I mean, it can attack potentially on turn 2 with Charge Bot and another 1-drop.
Tech, are you there? Apparently we've got the 5 shard logo. Nope. Okay.
It also is resistant to Heatwave.
It's not really resistant to Heatwave, though.
No, because I mean it loses. Yeah, but it takes it. What Neo means, I believe, is like you clear off all the other attack and defenders here,
and then it then becomes just
unable to attack or block. Yeah.
Heatwave may as well kill it, other than building up your board again. But a Charge Bot and another 1-drop here. No Sapphire though. If you had the Sapphire, that could have been a pretty strong turn.
It's still not bad here. Electroid and Charge Bot all together. Like you said, if he had the Sapphire, it would have been Charge Bot, Worker Bot off the passive, Hornet Bot plans. Charge Bot and Worker Bot would create the Hornet Bot, and Electroid would swing.
But at least in this configuration, if it's any consolation, that Worker Bot isn't out if Henip does decide to play Heatwave, and he can leave the Hornet Bot with 1 counter. And Electroid will survive that.
That's true. So we'll see Henip just pass turn off. He's going to let his opponent build the Worker Bot, the Hornet Bot, which at the very least will be able to swing on its own. And we'll see what else happens here.
Sapphire coming 1 turn too late for that immediate swing.
But still in time for a swing possibly, but the immediate response here is burn on the Hornet Bot. Perhaps a little, oh no, immediately verdicted. Followed up by another burn. Yeah, there's the chain.
Likely that verdict being side decked in response to a fairly defensive Diamond Ruby deck. Answers burn, answers Heatwave, answers Solitary Exile, Repel. Assuming many of those cards are still active for this game, Verdict's a fine choice to put in.
And
Not helping him there.
That does bring Henip down to 2 in hand, though, which is pretty significant. He had a lot of card advantage last time and still managed to have the game slip away from him.
Yeah, that is a lot of cards to prevent Electroid from attacking this turn.
So we'll see. We'll see if the Soul Marble can develop Henip's side of the board into a more advantageous position.
No swing
he
with
has
the charge
anything.
bot, which was interesting.
Yeah, it just seems like lost damage at that point. It's only a point, but I mean, we have seen a single point matter before.
Shard comes in, meaning that Henip is 2 in hand again, and one of those could still be a shard. We see a Tunnel Troop again. Now we know there are 2. Could be Reese or Mega Hulk, or I guess it could be one of the others we haven't seen. Probably not a Fidget Smith with nothing on board, though. Although, Fidget Smith could be a pretty strong card against a Cavalry in this situation.
Yeah, in the sort of rare chance that a Cavalry is built here, that is. It's not impossible to believe that that would be the case, but it's not... I mean, it does require that Henip devotes his entire next turn to both having a shard and then playing up his Soul Marble that way.
I think that knowing there isn't much direct removal in this kind of deck, Cavalry might be the option for me. And he may just not have a troop in his hand. He has only 2 cards, so it could be the case that he doesn't have a troop to play down after armaments.
Yeah. Also,
He's
the
going
Soul
to pump it
Cavalry. Yeah, the Soul Cavalry also very good at just gumming up the board. We'll be right back real quick.
He does indeed choose Soul Cavalry. 6/6 Spell Shield Steadfast. And because it started the turn in play, it does get to attack immediately after its transform.
I think really he's got to be racing here because, you know, as soon as that Tunnel Troop comes out, it's going to be a little bit of trouble for him, depending on what it is. Reese maybe would be more trouble. But he gets that life swing, takes 6 life health even away from his opponent, and gains 6 of his own. There is a Terrabot, which isn't going to stop the Cavalry, but it does activate that Electroid along with the Workerbot. So next turn we'll see a Warhulk, and he can block and kill the Soul Cavalry now, which is definitely something. Heatwave could still jam things up again here, though.
Bated breath. Let's see the card.
Plays a shot again there. So 2 cards in hand. We don't know if they're playable. We actually have no idea what they are. They could just be 2 shards for all we know.
What relevant cards could they even be to not have been played yet, though?
Well,
And I'm back.
there's one. It's a box. I would say this heads the way of the Terrabot, honestly, in this situation. Really no reason to go for that Electroid or any of the 1/1s. I was going for the construction plans. That's actually pretty interesting. Doesn't perceive the Terrabot as a threat, clearly.
I mean, it is a little bit. It does stop him from swinging. But I suppose if ever...
I mean, if he already knew he wasn't attacking this turn, and knowing that Warhulk would be coming out next turn and be a threat, though he could block it.
I wonder
Yeah,
if there's
I mean-
zero constant, like 0 ways for Djinn to deal with constants.
Well, there pretty much isn't, but I think I would be holding that solitary for whatever's underground. So either he's got something in his hand which is going to answer that tunnel card, or I think that may have been a little hasty with that box, especially on something he can block so easily with the cavalry.
Here we see that second Shards of Fate. This time, I believe, going for the ruby, right? For that third threshold, just in case the last card in his hand, which would be very good here, is Zakir.
Yeah, Zakir, there's a certain card that Zakir could create, which would be very, very handy indeed.
Create several great cards.
Yeah, I mean, they're all great, but there is one that's normally not the good one, but you would really want it here, yeah.
It would decimate Djinni's board completely and reduce him to one resource.
And there it is.
There's
There's
a Mega
that
Hulk.
Tectonic Mega Hulk.
Guess he's got to hope that card in his hand's a repel.
I mean, which is still fairly good here. I mean, it wouldn't put an end to Jin's reign here, but it would be mildly annoying for him. And it looks like it is, in fact. Yeah. But of note, regular repel, not an alternate art repel.
They're expensive, man.
Well, no, it's of note because he did play an alternate art one earlier, right?
So that's pretty good for him.
Oh. Now,
Swing City again. He can swing once he plays this.
Kind of. I mean, he can swing. Yeah, he can swing. Never mind. Obviously, because then
Electroid is disabled again.
Yeah. Which we have talked about several times here, but.
You know, Burn could block and kill. No, Burn couldn't do it because it's got Spell Shield, and I'm talking nonsense.
Exactly. It's easy to forget all of the little tiny intricacies there when you're not the one sitting behind doing the math. When you don't know what your cards are. Henip down to 0 cards in hand. This is still anybody's game. He's got no crush. He
has a nice 31 health buffer though.
He does. He does have a huge buffer in health. I mean, but Jin's deck is all about reducing that total very quickly. Diamond Ruby not really good at drawing extra cards, whereas Sapphire Ruby maybe not in this matchup necessarily having great card draw, does actually have access to things like Gearsmith, which here was 2 cards in 1. Played a Gearsmith, found an artifact.
Things like
swing with
presumably that Terabot. He could swing with yeah. It's a little bit risky because now you run the semi-risk of a top deck Burn, Crackling Bolt, or Heat Wave, allowing Cavalry to swing again, but really is that the end of the world?
Totem pretty good here when he's on 7 resources. It's going to be, even if he doesn't top deck anything, he's going to be getting value from those resources now.
Yeah, that's something to do with those resources, and more importantly, that will eventually shut down the Terabots before they can push through lethal. Mostly, like Aki mentioned before, because of that very impressive health buffer that Henip built earlier.
He is considering attacking with it. He may be trying to get Terabot to block. He may end up getting the Electroid.
Well, if he gets rid of Terabot, he gets rid of Electroid too, at least temporarily. And it stops his opponent from being able to block the Living Totem sooner, because there's only one flight blocker there. So it is fairly relevant getting rid of that Terabot now.
Interesting that he chose to do that after playing the Living Totem, though. Naturally, you would want to represent a card and resources prior to doing that, even if there's not much in the meta that Henip could have had there. I mean, you could have still, maybe I'm the guy running a preservation, you know?
which I believe should be run in this deck. It's pretty sweet.
This matchup in particular, it's not terrible in, so...
Electroid and Therabot swinging in.
Steadfast.
So we see
Henip
decide to put Steadfast. Well, it's not terrible necessarily that he put Steadfast on it. It's interesting that he chose to do it while Djinn still has a card in hand and resources open, because if that was a burn, he would very much regret that decision there.
If it was a burn.
Yeah.
But does this deck normally run burn? I don't think it does.
Perhaps not. Might have some in the reserves. That being said, you would be eating those burns from a second set of players from your B and C players, so it's actually less likely burn is here. Yeah.
So this Steadfast may be because maybe to facilitate this attack. It can block again next turn as it doesn't exhaust when attacking. No block from the opponent, so he's going to actually pump for 4 and be ready to block that Electroid and get that health buffer back.
Apparently it runs it in the board, but you'd never bring it in from this matchup. That's a tweet from DJ Scrub JD in chat right now. Not really a tweet, but a viewer comment. So
tweets.
Well, we just got a tweet. Send your tweets to hashtag 5 shards. Hashtag Cup of Fate.
5 shards.
Oh, no. Hashtags. Oh. Use hashtags. We'll track those hashtags.
We can get it trending.
Yep. We'll get the Cup of Fate trending today. So, that health total for Djinn down to 4, which is kind of a scary place to be here, even though he knows his opponent's top decking. His board is still impressive. 2 Electroids, a Terabot, couple of 1/1s. But Henip has that living totem, which is close to just being able to run the game down.
It can get +1/+1 and flight, and all of a sudden the Terabot can't block it by itself. Or can and needs to.
Yeah. I actually can't. It's very difficult to think of a way where Djinn's going to be able to push damage through here now. His board state is impressive, but that living totem is just such a good use of resources that it's hard to imagine a spot. Like, it has to be removed, and I can't think of the removal that does it.
And that Drew's Colossal Walker as well is going to swing in and needs to be stopped as well.
With at least 8 defense. And there we see it didn't really matter because there's the top deck Solitary Exile. That will lock up the Terabot and allow lethal regardless of blocks.
And we'll go into a game 3.
Yep, so this is another match reaching game 3. Another Ruby Diamond deck, but at least we get to see a far more interesting variant of it here. We get to see it played against Kaldheim's deck, which I think is a deck where it's favored. The heat waves are so good here that you have to put the game in its favor, right? But you can still lose on turn 3 or 4 to that explosive dwarf aggro.
It can certainly explode very, very quickly. Interesting note that we've actually, it could be just simply coincidence, but this is our 3rd Diamond Ruby deck in a row that we've casted. And at the beginning, we were speculating that the combination of decks we can expect to see, reasonably see, where it did not involve Diamond Ruby. It was Diamond Blood, Ruby Wild, and Sapphire. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I think... Okay, so this is just a little bit of my thought process on why we're seeing them. Maybe not necessarily a direct answer. But a lot of the people who stream have listed themselves as the A player, or as the team captain, maybe assuming that was what A player was about. Whereas the team captain could have been A, B, or C. It didn't really matter. And I think they're the ones more... this is the deck that kind of leans itself towards the most experienced player on the team running it. And I don't want to say the streamers are always the most experienced players, but they are confident enough to display their skills out there, which at least makes them feel like confident. Yeah, it's hard to voice what I'm saying, but I think that's part of it. Is it's a deck that the confident are playing, and the confident people are streaming.
So with that in mind, what are the teammates running? I wonder. Because of course we only see the streamer's perspective, and the streamer is in one of the slots. So we're going to see what they, as you said, something that the streamer is confident in and can play pretty well. What does that mean for the other two in the team that we may not end up seeing?
And that is definitely not what I said. I didn't say that if you don't stream, you suck. No, not you. I was just replying to chat.
You don't stream. I agree with that. That's it.
Well, Infamous Neo confirmed for having a Kappa face on permanently.
Gearsmith coming out here.
Nero, of course, having a little more value there. Ruby Wild is an auto-lose versus Mono Sapphire, so they give Ruby the diamond and let Blood try to control it on its own. Oh, Ruby Wild is auto-lose. Okay. That's fair. That's a fair assessment.
And Mono Sapphire has been on the rise. Anyway, back to the game.
Yeah, we do see the turn 1 Gearsmith, one of the very few turn 1 plays in the game. We talk a lot about Ancestors Chosen probably being the most powerful one drop in the game, and Whiffsmith here has the potential to be very good, and has the potential to do what we just saw. Gearsmith hits the board as a 1/1 for 1. He is a dwarf, which is relevant, but other than that, he has done nothing. Did not find an artifact in the top 3 cards.
I always like to point out Gearsmith as an example of a digital space card, as you get to look at your top 3 cards, but you don't get to reveal it to your opponent. In another card game, a physical card game, that would actually reveal the cards because you're taking something specific.
Yeah, but you would have to prove you weren't cheating.
Exactly, but here,
in addition, it also reduces the cost of a card that you hide. So it does a lot of things that are only available in the digital space. Like it's mechanically very simple, but it's also thematically very complex.
After playing years of physical card games, it's like, oh, that's really subtle and really awesome.
It's looking like the gear whiff here has cost him fairly dearly. I mean, he's not playing a shard. Maybe, okay, he does have one. Okay, I was thinking maybe he didn't have one and he'd assume he would get an artifact off of that Gearsmith, and that's why it was a keepable hand.
Of all the decks to try to live off one shard, this is the deck that can do it.
Oh, yeah.
Worth noting, that little bit of delay in his play could have just simply been him talking with his teammates about a play in a different game or asking for help on his own keep.
Which is entirely encouraged in team events usually. In a physical setting, you have all 3 players sitting right next to each other, able to see each other's hand.
Well,
as a kick in the gut.
That's good. That's good for Henip. That's great for him.
Oh yeah,
it's not good for someone.
Probably the most salt-inducing thing that can happen on turn 2.
I would go as far as to say that an Angel of Dawn is never good on turn 2.
You're never happy to see it. It's called the Avatar of Hope, which I've always thought is weird, right? Because I
hope I get an Angel of Dawn.
Yeah, well, I guess I hope I get an Angel of Dawn, but when does your opponent ever see it and go, "Oh, it's the Avatar of Hope. I'm so filled with hope and happiness." No, it's not the case. Again, Jin doesn't have a lot of ways to deal with an Angel either. And
we got a Reese down. One of those is a Reese. Probably the first one, because it just makes more sense to get that online earlier. It does hold back the charge power as well. Obviously not much point in holding back on putting a workable out when your damage is coming from an Angel of Dawn.
Ouch. Things just lining up for Henip.
Yeah.
He can't do it this turn, though. He needs to do just that first.
Again, a Fishersmith here would be at least reasonable for Jin. He would feel a lot better about having one because it would eat that living totem immediately.
Unfortunately, that does not seem to be the case. Does not trigger anything from either tunnel troop. I would be interested in trying out this deck with Fisher Smith inside. It's a dwarf. It's cheap. It helps against aggro. Anytime you kill something for basically free is a great time.
In reserves, it makes sense, especially when you're tunneling a lot of things anyway, because there's no way you'd expect that to be a Fisher Smith. Like you would swing with that living totem all the time.
If you do expect it's a Fisher Smith and not swing, you potentially line up an extra, just a free turn for a Reese to line up. So we were talking about the Angel being a big deal here. The Angel has Jin on a 2-turn clock here, but Jin is putting everything onto the board. Multiple tunneling troops, multiple gearsmiths, multiple robots. And if those tunneling troops come up big enough, they might be able to get some damage through. But again, he is on a 2.
I was about to say the problem is the heat wave that's about to come down doesn't hit that totem now he's buffed it.
Yeah.
And just like that, the robots topple. Angel and Totem are fine. Another 7 damage, and he could even opt to give one of them life drain with his charge power. Probably doesn't need to. But before this happened, I was going to say on the Fisher Smith note, this is the kind of deck that does have a lot of large targets large targets that aren't flight that Fisher Smith can hit. I guess in particular, the two we're looking at, Angel, Dawn, and Living Totem, could get around that. Living Totem giving itself flight, but Drew's Colossal Walker comes to mind. Big, hulking thing. Losing that to a Fisher Smith would be painful.
So there's 3 tunneling counters with 1, 2, and 3 on them. Charge Bot is the last card in Jin's hand, which
3 Reese's.
That's all she wrote, I think. The flight will come onto that living totem, and that will be
all of it, especially since he played his last card. We end up finding a follow-up living totem off the draw there. Anyway, be interesting to know what those 3 cards are.
I mean, it's Mega Hulk Reese, I would say.
No, I think it has to be, yeah. It could be a Mimi, like the Mimeobuck could have hit a Reese and then he could have drawn the other Reese, so it could have been double Reese. But that's the round for Team Mom cards, not necessarily for the whole team, but Henip takes down his game.
I'm